Perfect. All right, let's get this going here. Welcome to the presentation on cash damming. This is how you're going to treat yourself like the wealthy, and you actually convert your mortgage into something that's going to work for you. I am going to take myself off camera here shortly, just because once we start, there's going to be a lot of information, and I just don't want it getting in the way. As we go through this, I'm not going to be able to stop and answer any questions, but if you do have anything, please put it in the chat right away. At the end, I'll get to it. I may even answer it. But we are going to have a Q&A at the end as well. Just so you know, it's because it's on a webinar. Stuff is a tiny bit delayed. So once we get to that part of it, it might seem I'm not answering you right away, but don't worry, all the questions will be answered. So the information we go over today, this can profoundly change some people's lives. And the great thing is you don't need any extra cash for it. We're going to jump right in and start with a little background on what the strategy is all about, how and why it works, and how the wealthy Canadians have used this financial technique for decades, literally since the Tax Act was created to maintain their financial advantage. We'll take a look at why the strategy is more relevant than ever today, and why your mortgage is perhaps one of the most powerful and flexible financial tools you can have at your disposal to make meaningful headway on your path to financial freedom. Now, if you're listening to this presentation, you most likely have a mortgage, or you're thinking about getting a mortgage, you're a homeowner or in the process of becoming a homeowner, and you've already committed to making payments on your mortgage for the next 20, 30 years or more. What I'm going to show you today is how to structure your mortgage in a way that helps you be more tax efficient, so you can keep your hands on more of your hard-earned money along the way. Then I'll show you how to use those tax savings, your tax refunds, to actually accelerate the pay down of your mortgage, so you can get ahead and build wealth for your future, all without contributing any extra cash beyond your regular mortgage payment, which is pretty crazy because most financial strategies typically require you to put money in to get that benefit. This doesn't. What we're going to be doing is reorganizing cash flows, payments that you already committed to making, in a way that's more efficient. So we'll take a look at how to technically implement these concepts, and then we'll explore a few different scenarios that can give you a feel for the financial benefits and how this might work for you. Now, a little history on the Smith maneuver. This has been around for about the 1980s. It was designed by Fraser Smith. He also created the book, Is Your Mortgage Tax Deductible? Back in 2003, which was more or less a count of how we developed this way, because in the States, they actually get to write off the interest on their primary home. Here in Canada, we don't get to do that. More recently, Rob Smith, Fraser's son, wrote a follow-up to the original classic, Master Your Mortgage for Your Financial Freedom, which provides a step-by-step process for actually making your mortgage tax deductible. Now, we don't have time to go over all the different scenarios and the different strategies within the Smith maneuver today. What I'm really going to be focusing on today is the cash damming strategy with rental properties, or actually getting your first rental property. Now, there is other strategies within the Smith maneuver that can also greatly increase your net wealth, get those refunds without a rental property. So please get in touch with me after, and we can dive deeper into those. Now, you can buy this book on Amazon for around 25 bucks. I have a deal for you. Obviously, you guys are here, you're watching it, and even if you're just watching the recording, book a call with me, send me an email, send me a text just asking for a little bit more information, and I'm going to send you the Master Your Mortgage Financial to Freedom for free. So stick around. I promise that you won't be disappointed. Now, let's start by taking a look at why we need this strategy in the first place. We already know the Smith maneuver with cash damming has been around for decades, but now more than ever, Canadians need strategy like this to maintain their financial edge and get ahead. One, we've seen the rising cost of living across the board on everything from groceries to homes, clothing to travel, fuel, education, pretty much everything. We know it's mainly about housing that everyone talks about, but it's not just housing. More of our money is going to servicing debt. People are borrowing more, rates are higher, and affordability is worse than it's ever been. It's difficult to make ends meet and actually maintain the lifestyle we've grown accustomed to, because our incomes just aren't keeping up. The rate of increases in the cost of living far exceeds our capacity to absorb these increases. Some people have the earning potential to beat inflation for sure, but those are the lucky few. Anyone with a fixed income is feeling the shift that's happening right now. Now, this is important because people are starting to make concessions. Do I keep doing X and Y and risk redlining financially, or do I change X, or do I stop X altogether and focus more on Y? Unfortunately, the thing that often gets sacrificed first is the money we put aside for our future savings. If someone is having a tough time affording today, how the heck are they going to put enough money aside to also afford tomorrow? Let me say that in a bit of a different way. The more resources that are needed to cover the cost of living, the less we're able to save for retirement. And when we put off investing in favor of spending, we lose out on valuable years where those investments can grow. I'll just deal with this thing in front of me now and I'll worry about saving tomorrow. Now, the consequences, I believe, is that people will begin to adjust expectations around when they'll actually be able to retire and the quality of lifestyle they'll be able to afford in their later years. Also, we're living longer than ever before, and we're already not saving enough to adequately support those extra years. Coupled in the fact with the rising cost of living and a reduction in saving rates, I think we'll find that many of us are going to have to adjust our future expectations, what it actually means to retire comfortably. And if not us, then it's certainly going to be our kids. Because these pressures aren't just going to go away, inflation isn't going to magically stop anytime soon. Even when the government manages to get us back to that target 2 to 3% range, it's still an issue. All we have to do is look back at home prices, cars, groceries, fuel, clothing, travel. All these things over the last 15 years, while inflation has said been under control, have all more or less doubled. Now, for the most part, we haven't seen people's income magically double. People are making more or less the same amount of money as they were a decade ago. Now, maybe a bit more, but not enough to keep up with the pace of inflation. Let's look at teachers, for example. 15 years ago, a teacher would earn around 60 to 80,000, maybe a little bit more depending on the seniority. Now, I don't know many teachers today that are making 150,000 or more. People aren't suddenly going to find themselves with more money. It's not getting better. We're not miraculously going to be able to save more than we already have. And we know historically the little amount we do save just isn't enough. Now, how do I know that the two words Walmart greeter? The fact that those two words can conjure an emotional reaction for some people, and it's not a good way, is exactly why. We need better strategies to deal with the realities of today. Which brings us to the cash damning strategy. The cash damning strategy is one of those miracles of finances that gives people a leg up saving for their financial future. But it's not even a miracle at all. It's really just an education piece that's lacking among the middle class. You see, wealthy Canadians know and understand these rules and leverage them to their advantage every single day. They know that they have the know and how and the resources to do things the majority of Canadians just can't. For the rest of us, we have to learn new concepts, rewire our brains to get our head around how life strategies like this can help us get ahead. So here's an example to illustrate what I'm actually talking about. When a wealthy person buys a home and invests, here's how they actually go about it. First, they're going to use their cash to purchase the home. Now, when they refinance the property and invest the capital to build additional wealth, they know that when you buy a home to live in, you can't write the interest off. Any mortgage you get to purchase the home, this is considered bad debt, same as getting a finance vehicle. It's not that the wealthy don't carry debt. They really have a lot of it. It's just that they prefer it can be tax efficient, so they avoid carrying bad debt whenever they can. In this example, they've used their personal cash to buy the home, so they technically wouldn't need a mortgage, which would otherwise be on the left-hand side where you see the down arrow. And what they do is immediately after buying the home, they borrow the funds back out to actually invest. That's our yellow investment line of credit you see on the right. Now, this has some serious advantages to it. There are four main benefits. The first being that they don't sit on any debt equity. They seek out ways to leverage their equity and put it to work, because it actually allows them to multiply the number of assets they have, in which turn results in faster wealth appreciation. Second, they get tax benefits because they borrowed the money to actively contribute, invest, and grow the growth of the economy and the expansion of wealth. When you borrow to invest, as long as the investment has the capability of generating income, then the government lets you write that interest off. Third, the debt doesn't appreciate. It has servicing costs like interest, but the debt is static. Not only is it static, but it actually loses value over time. And I'll explain what I mean by this in a minute. The fourth benefit is, while the debt stays static, the assets and the income that the assets generate tend to appreciate with inflation. So here's a quick example. Let's say if you bought a house in Vancouver or Toronto 30 years ago for $400,000 and borrowed $300,000 to buy it. All you did was pay interest on the loan. The debt would still be worth $300,000 today, and that house would be worth around $3 to $4 million. Now, the wealthy know that inflation works in their favor on both sides of the balance sheet. Not only is the home worth significantly more, but the relative value of the money borrowed to purchase the home is worth way less. $300,000 may have been a lot of money at that time, but inflation has cut that purchasing power of that money by 50 to 75% over the same time period. Now, it's easier for most young adults to get to about a $300,000 mortgage right now, but we know 30 years ago that was a crazy amount of money. Now, this is a critical concept because most of us have been taught that debt is bad and we need to eliminate it at all costs. But when you start to understand that inflation does the job for us, you realize it's really not that bad. There's a very powerful concept because most of us intuitively get that inflation increases the value of assets over time. That makes sense to us. But it's a lot harder time to get comfortable with the concept of inflation eroding the value of debt over time. You don't even have to pay off the debt for this to actually work. As long as you have a long enough time horizon, this is not for a short-term thing. The value of the debt you take on to acquire appreciating assets will feel less and less more important as the time goes on. It's like the metal left out in the rain. Not much is going to happen at first, but after a while it will rust, and that rust is going to eat away at the metal over time. And if you wait long enough, eventually there's nothing left. That's what inflation does to debt. So if Albert Einstein were alive today, he would actually reframe his opinion about how compound interest is being the eighth wonder of the world. Instead, he'd point to inflation as the greatest wealth building lever in the history of humankind. Buying and holding appreciating assets with static debt, even if you never pay off the debt, is the single greatest way to leverage inflation to your personal benefit. The reason we've been taught to pay off our debt is because the system really only works if the masses use their regular income streams to send cash flow to the wealthy, who turn around and leverage the cash flow to buy more appreciating assets. We need to be thinking the same way, but the issue for most Canadians is we can't pay cash for home. We obviously don't have the resources for this. We need to borrow funds just to buy the home even in the first place. And because the government doesn't view our principal residence as an investment, because it actually doesn't generate income, it's not eligible for tax benefits. You can't write the interest off. So we're using debt to finance our personal lives, and when we have a little extra cash, we use our own after-tax dollars to invest. It's the complete opposite of how the wealthy manage their finances. Just gonna have some water here. Now, let's actually give you a concrete example. Let's go back in time just a few years ago, and you buy a home $750,000 that today is now worth $1 million. We put 20% down, $150,000, and borrow the rest, $600,000. The payments on the mortgage we make are with after-tax dollars, representing about 35% of our gross income, and roughly around 50% of our after-tax income. Now, that's being generous. Let's face it, it actually is probably higher than this. Despite eating up a major chunk of our disposable cash, we managed to make our payments on time, and we even make some progress on paying our mortgage down. Today, we owe $500,000, and the value of the home is worth $1 million. So we have a net equity of $500,000. Now, when we bought the home, we felt like we were in good shape financially, and we could also afford to put some investments, which again, we funded with our own cash after-tax dollars. Now, unfortunately, along the way, interest rates have moved up on us, our payments increased, and life in general has just gotten a little bit more expensive, to the point where we've had to make concessions in order to maintain our lifestyle and stay in the home. So we sacrificed the small amount of money we're putting aside for investments, saying to ourselves, once we get things under control, we'll get those investings going again. We know that investments need to go for a long horizon. Now let's look at what the wealthy person who could afford to pay for cash would actually do. Now, they put $750,000 down. They bought it outright, but instead of leaving the funds in the property as debt equity, they borrowed the $600,000 back and used the funds to purchase 3 more properties in the same price range. $600,000 is enough to cover $350,000 down payments plus closing. Now, initially, the rentals just barely even cash flow. The rents essentially cover the operating costs of the properties, which meant they weren't making a ton of money, but they weren't out of pocket either. Now, dollar for dollar, the wealthy person and the homeowner are essentially both servicing the exact same debt load on the primary residence. They both borrowed $600,000 with the exemption that the 100% of the interest on the wealthy person's mortgage was tax deductible because they borrowed that money to invest. Now, here's where it actually gets interesting. For the entire life of that mortgage, the wealthy person will pay 40% less interest. That's over $244,000 in interest savings over the 30 years at 5.45%. That's a material savings which gives them the option to buffer the impact of rising rates, double down on their investments, buy additional assets, and get even further ahead or just plain improve their lifestyle. Now, they could also use the savings to pay off the debt on the properties, but they're not going to be doing this because, in fact, they're going to keep tapping the equity any chance they get because they know the purchasing power of debt diminishes over time. And when you pull equity out of a property, you don't get taxed on it. And because they use the equity to build wealth rather than just leaving it sit there, they now have 4 properties worth $1 million and $500,000 equity in each. They have a total of $2 million in equity. We only have $500,000. Plus, each of the rentals generate income, which may have barely cash flowed at first, but the value of those rents appreciate over time. And the wealthy person is pocketing all that extra cash flow now. The property is more than debt service, and there's extra cash to go around. That's just what happens. I don't know anybody who pays the same level of rent that they did 30 years ago. Rents do appreciate. Now, but the real kicker is the most painful part of this entire exercise is the wealthy person is so much further ahead. And they actually paid $244,000 less than we did for their home because they got all that money back in the form of tax refunds over the life of their mortgage. The best structure wins. Now, the wealthy person's ability to accelerate their wealth was significantly enhanced because they understood the mechanics behind inflation and the double-sided impact it has on static debt and appreciating assets. Plus, they get the added tax benefits along the way, which gave them more resources to play with, to save and invest or spend to pay off debt to improve their lifestyle. Not only were they able to build more equity by owning more real estate, but their rental incomes grew as well. Because rents tend to move with inflation, they have a built-in buffer that automatically adjusts to help them maintain and expand their investment strategy over the long term. This can leverage the increased rents to acquire even more assets in the future without sacrificing lifestyle. Now, the natural comment is sure, but they started with more. They had enough money to buy the home outright. I don't have the luxury of paying cash for my home. Totally true. There's no argument there. That wasn't an apples to apples comparison, but that wasn't the point either. The point was to simply illustrate that there's a different way to think about debt and that most of us are leaving money on the table because we haven't structured our finances correctly. And that's not our fault. We're not starting from the same place of understanding. You can't do anything about your start point or where you come from, but you can course correct and change where you're going to be headed. Just because we don't have the same financial advantage as the wealthy doesn't mean these tools and levers aren't available to us. We just have to do it at a different scale. And that's where the cash jamming strategy comes in, because it allows us to structure our finances and incrementally leverage our equity to build wealth, reduce the taxes we pay, and improve our cash flow so we can get back some of our hard-earned tax dollars, buy more appreciating assets, and take a run at inflation before it actually takes a run at us. And the beauty of it is we can accomplish all of this simply by making our regular mortgage payment, which means if we understand and apply this financial technique correctly, we no longer have to choose between saving for the future and enjoying our lifestyle today. All right, let's get into the mechanics of how this works. The first step is we need to structure your mortgage as a readvanceable multi-component HELOC, a home equity line of credit. This which allows you to borrow equity as you pay down the principal on your mortgage. Remember, the wealthy person who paid off their mortgage on day one then allowed to borrow the money invest. Well, that's what this mortgage product allows you to do in very small amounts each month as you pay down your mortgage. Obviously, if you could just pay the whole thing off in one shot, you'd be the wealthy person and you wouldn't need this strategy. But since most of us don't have the cash to do that, we're going to put in a process to accomplish the same thing systematically over time. Each month, as you make your regular mortgage payment over here, the principal portion of the payment pays down the mortgage balance and becomes available in our equity line of credit, which we actually call our investment line of credit, our good debt. Now, eventually the mortgage you use to pay down the house goes to zero and your investment line grows over time. The funds you draw from the investment line are used to purchase qualifying investments so that A, you're offsetting the debt with appreciating assets that hopefully grow over time and help you build more wealth for yourself. And B, You get the tax advantage of borrowing to invest, and you can deduct the interest costs from your income each year, which puts some of those tax dollars we're talking about back into your pocket. It's also worth noting that this isn't a new strategy. This has been fully vetted by the CRA, and they even released a technical bulletin almost 20 years ago. They called it IT 533, laying out in detail how to properly implement this financial technique with the CRA. That technically refers to it as cash damming. Now, as long as the investments you choose generate income, which a rental property is, like I said, there is other strategies for this also. You can use that income plus your tax savings to accelerate the plan. Pay off even more of your non-deductible mortgage, draw the equity back out, increase your tax deduction and your tax deductible debt, potentially growing an investment portfolio even further, and gradually accelerate your financial benefit as the time goes on. Now, this takes a minute at first, but it starts to snowball as you transfer money from one side of the balance sheet to the other. Remember, if you could do it in one shot, you would. So part of what we do is when we sit down to review your plan together, we look at everything you have on the go today, your current assets, and we look at for ways to optimize those assets and your cash flows as part of the initial setup. This is a really good time to mention that I'm not a licensed financial advisor or a tax accountant. Depending on the type of investments and the Smith Maneuver strategy that you're going to be implementing, you're going to want to make sure you go over that with a licensed financial advisor as well as a tax accountant to make sure all this stuff is done correctly. And if you don't have a financial advisor or you don't currently work with an accountant, that's not a problem. I can make introductions to the people who actually understand the strategy, as there is a Smith Maneuver certified professional course for this stuff. But I definitely don't recommend you try to do this without a professional guidance, at the very least on the tax side. You might be the person who likes to self-manage their investments, and that's fine, but I highly recommend to seek professional tax advice if you're running any kind of cash damming. And just a quick comment on the investment options. A lot of my clients choose real estate as the main investment vehicle for the strategy. There's some very good reasons for that, which we'll get into in a minute. But if you're planning to purchase real estate, then you're definitely going to want to work closely with your realtor who understands the strategy and how to structure your real estate portfolio to make sure we're setting you up for the future. Which brings me to my part. Think of me as your team quarterback. I'm on point to support you with financing and cash flow management. I'll help you design a cash flow and mortgage strategy that's going to make sense for you. And we'll work closely with all your advisors, real estate, investment, and tax to ensure everything you're doing is structured correctly and that you're optimizing your cash flows for maximum efficiency. Now that you understand the role that everyone plays, I can give you a little bit more insight into different types of investments that actually work with the Smith Maneuver strategy. There's really three types of investors when it comes to the actual Smith Maneuver. And you're going to fall into at least one of these buckets, maybe two, sometimes, but rarely you might even fall all three categories. The categories are market investor, real estate investor, and sole proprietor. That's it. You're either investing in the capital markets, in real estate, or you're running your own unincorporated small business. But like I said, for today's webinar, we're really focusing on cash damming with rental properties. I'll give you a quick example of other strategies within the Smith Maneuver here, though. For example, if you are a sole proprietor, you might have certain expenses in your business you can actually pay from your investment line of credit that would be considered eligible for interest deductions in the eyes of the CRA. Same goes for investing in capital markets and also for real estate. The fundamental rule CRA applies to determine if your investments are eligible or not is simply whether investment has the potential or capability of generating income. It's really that simple. Anytime you borrow money to earn income, you can write the interest off. And it doesn't matter what security or collateral you use to borrow the money. The only thing that matters is that you can prove you use the funds to invest or grow your business with the intent of generating income. That's why when you borrow against your home to build wealth and create income for yourself, you can write the interest off. Here's an example. Let's say you borrow money to finance a car and you use that vehicle exclusively for the purpose of running your Uber or taxi service. Since you intend on generating income for your taxi business, any cost associated with the business, including the interest on the finance vehicle, is tax deductible. Now, when you buy a stock, a GIC bond, or share in a MIC, a real estate rental, any type of capital investment where the investment pays a regular dividend or some kind of income stream, the same rule applies. Because you bought with the intent of generating income, you can deduct the carrying cost on the loan. Now, keep in mind, when buying real estate, it must be a rental. This can't be for the personal use. You can't be using this for second homes or vacation properties that you don't tend on renting on. But it definitely works for when you're using a property that's going to generate income. This can be for Airbnb, long-term, short-term, any of that stuff. Now that we've determined the type of investments you have in one place and how you want to invest in the future, it's going to be time to get into the fun stuff. We can start to figure out how we should structure your mortgage, design a cash flow strategy that's custom to your specific situation, and how we can get a sense for the financial benefits you're likely to achieve with the strategy. Now, obviously, there are a lot of paths that we can take with this strategy, and we just don't have time to cover them all today. But I would like to share some numbers with you to give you a sense of how powerful this can be and the kind of financial benefits the typical homeowner might expect over the life of their mortgage. The best way for me to illustrate this is to focus on a scenario where the homeowner has a principal residence and a rental property. Firstly, because it's a powerful version of the strategy, when you have a rental property, you can use the cash flows from the rental to accelerate the debt conversion process on your principal residence. This is where we apply the CRA cash damming technique. Remember Bulletin IT 533? Rental cash damming is one of the fastest ways to convert your mortgage from a non-deductible home loan to a tax-deductible investment loan. So you can get all those tax benefits, and I'll show you how to do that shortly with 3 slightly different examples. The third reason I like focusing on rental cash damming is because I'm actually licensed to talk about it. It falls squarely in my bucket: mortgages, finances, and real estate. I can talk about this stuff all day long. I'm not crossing any lines. I'm not talking to you about mutual funds, market investments, where we would also need to bring in your advisor or talk to someone else. So it's just a really great place for us to start talking about the strategy and how it can work for you. Now, another reason is because a lot of my clients have real estate portfolios. So it's just a good fit. Whether you're someone who's planning on acquiring your first rental, a seasoned investor with a whole portfolio, a lot of people I talk with are just really curious about real estate and how they can buy more properties as efficiently as possible. It's a great investment strategy. A lot of people have built wealth in real estate, and it's a really easy way to learn about cash damming because real estate just makes sense to a lot of people. And finally, rental cash damming ties in really nicely with some of the other advanced planning I like to do with my clients, like the rental versus an RESP strategy, where you actually fund your children's education using real estate instead of a traditional RESP. I'm not going to dive into this too much, but it's a really awesome strategy that actually sets your kids up with 3 to 5 times more education savings and gives them a ton of extra options when they graduate high school, especially if they decided they didn't want to go to university. So what we're going to do is take a closer look at the typical scenario. The 3 scenarios actually is what we're going to be using. For someone who owns a home, let's say they have a $500,000 mortgage and their home is worth $800,000. The first thing is this only works if you have at least 20% equity in your home. Now, the reason for that is the multi-component structures that we actually need for the debt conversion, so you can borrow your principal back as fast as you pay it down. The products that work for you just isn't available beyond 80%. So you do need to have a bit of equity to get started. And if you're not there yet, don't worry about it. We've got other strategies we can work on together in the meantime to get you to a point where you can start implementing more advanced financial techniques like this. So don't worry. But in this example, because the home is worth $800,000, the homeowner can actually borrow more than the $500,000 they owe on the mortgage. They have room to access an additional $140,000, which can be used as a down payment on a rental. Right? 80% of $800,000 is $640,000. They owe $500,000. That is a difference of $140,000. So if you have $140,000 to invest in real estate, you can buy a rental worth around $500,000. You're basically going to put 25% down. That's $125,000 down. And that leaves you with a little bit of a buffer, $15,000 left over for closing costs and any extra things. So those are the high level numbers. Now let's actually look at the examples. Firstly, we're going to look at a scenario where the homeowner already owns a $500,000 rental. Some of you watching this already have rentals, and if you're not taking advantage of the strategy, you're actually leaving money on the table. Plus, because you already own the rental, you're not taking on any additional investment risk than you already have. So it's really just a cash flow management play at this point. You really should have a look at this, considering it, and see what you can with these different scenarios. Plus, it just gives us a baseline for evaluating the other two scenarios. The second example is where we use the available equity in the primary residence to fund the down payment and actually buy a rental. I want to run the numbers as if the property is cash flow neutral, meaning the rental income perfectly offsets the expenses, so you don't have any additional monthly inputs. We buy the rental and it pays for itself. Remember, the wealthy are constantly looking for ways to acquire more assets, and they don't like sitting on debt equity, especially when the income from the future investments offsets that debt. And the third example is the exact same rental purchase, but we're actually going to assume the rental income isn't quite enough to debt service the property. It's negative cash flow, which means we have to use some of our own money if we weren't implementing the strategy to actually cover the rental expenses beyond what the rental income supports. And the reason we're going to look at this scenario is because depending on what type of investor you're looking at, are you a cash flow investor or are you an appreciation investor? We like to show the different options. Now, and if you're just out shopping for a rental without a proper cash flow strategy, then you really need to think twice before buying a negative cash flow property. Because if you have to reallocate some of the amount of your personal resources, that would otherwise be marked for other savings. Remember, that's one of the big problems we're trying to address here. The practical reality that we often need to choose between lifestyle today and investing for tomorrow. But with a rental cash damage strategy, it's possible to buy a rental with negative cash flow and still have it make sense financially. Plus, the structure that we put in place will self-fund the shortfall between the rental income and the expenses, so it actually doesn't come out of your own pocket. Now we're starting to think differently about how our mortgage, which, let's face it, often feels like a huge monkey that we're just never going to get off our back, can serve as a powerful wealth building tool we can leverage to help us get ahead. All right, we're almost ready to see how cash damming actually works. Before we do that, let's just remember what we're actually trying to accomplish here. We're acquiring an income generating asset that will help us build additional wealth for the future. We're going to structure our principal residence so that we can use the cash flows from that asset to convert our home mortgage into a tax deductible investment loan. That's going to allow us to reduce our taxes and keep more of our hard-earned money in our pockets, so we can beat inflation and improve our lifestyle over time. And we're going to accomplish all this without any additional cash inputs beyond our regular mortgage payment and any existing payments we're already allocating to investments or plan to allocate. So for an example, if you're thinking about investing in RSPs for your kids, we can look at actually incorporating those cash flows and put this entire plan on steroids. So let's look at the mortgage structure. For this structure to work, we need to set up your principal residence with a new multi-component mortgage that has an investment line of credit attached to it. There are lots of mortgage products out there that on the surface might look like they work for this, but in reality lack some of the features you're going to need to run your monthly cash flow cycle. It's really important that the investment line of credit is set up to auto readvance. What that means is the principal you pay down on your non-deductible mortgage automatically becomes available to draw from in the investment line of credit. So you can access those funds every single month to service the cash flow on your rentals. If the structure you have in place doesn't do that, it's going to cause a ton of friction. You're going to have implementation issues, and you're most likely going to get frustrated and quit. And we know the strategy is for the long term. When we work together, I make sure we put that structure in place, and I hold your hand to help you get your cash flows going while you learn to implement the strategy. Now, the goal here is to pay down your non-deductible debt as fast as humanly possible. And the way we do that is by applying the rental income as a prepayment on your mortgage each month. Then reborrow that same amount from the investment line of credit to service the rental expenses. Each month, we convert more and more of your mortgage over to the investment line, the yellow line on the right, which results in increased tax refunds that you can use to pay down your mortgage even faster and accelerate your wealth building efforts. Now, here's how it works. You make your regular mortgage payment each month to your principal residence mortgage. Your payments are set to come from your household bank account, same as before, nothing changes. Then we have the rental property, the little orange house at the top of the screen. Your monthly rental income is on the left, that's the money you get from your tenant, and the rental expenses over on the right, which include things like your principal and interest, property taxes, condo fees, anything else. The first thing that happens in the cash flow cycle each month is the tenant pays you rent. On the first of the month, you get a check or e-transfer, however you collect it. Now, what most Canadians will do is deposit the income with the bank like an account dedicated for the rental, and then pay the expenses on the property from that same account, which is fair because we've all been taught to do it this way. Keep your rental cash flow separate from your personal cash flows. But when you do it that way, you miss this wonderful opportunity to create additional tax efficiencies for yourself. Because there's actually no rule that says you need to use your rental income to pay your rental expense. When you receive the income from your tenant, it's yours. You can do whatever you want with it. Now, this takes a minute to get comfortable with because the natural tendency is to use the rental income to pay the rental expenses. That just makes sense to us. But there's a better way to manage the cash flow. What you're going to do is use the rental income to pay off your non-deductible mortgage first, because you don't get any tax benefits for carrying that mortgage. It's bad debt, so let's get rid of it. That's the first step. You make your regular mortgage payment, same as before, and you make an additional prepayment equal to the value of the monthly rent, which you can see with the two arrows going to the blue house. The principal portion of your regular mortgage payment plus the full value of that prepayment goes directly to pay down your mortgage balance, and the equity immediately becomes available in that investment line of credit, which you then draw back out to cover your rental expenses and run your landlord business. Money goes into your rental account. You still have this account to keep everything separate for the accountants. You draw from your investment line to then pay for your rental expenses. That's it. Every single month, you use the rental income to prepay your mortgage and you borrow the funds to cover your rental expenses. That's cash standing. It can be very straightforward. So let's take a case look, a study of how these numbers actually play out. In this scenario, the homeowner has a $500,000 mortgage on their principal residence. They use the mortgage to buy the home, so they're not currently getting any tax benefits on the debt. They have a 30-year amortization at 5.45, which means the monthly mortgage payment is $2,800. And their marginal tax bracket is 40%, which means that for any debt they convert it to a tax deductible investment loan, they'll actually end up getting 40% of the interest back every year at tax time. Now, the rental property is worth $500,000, has a mortgage on it with a balance of $375,000. So that's an equity of $125,000. And the total annual cost to run the property is just over $33,000, $2,753 a month to be precise. This expense includes $25,000 in mortgage payments, $5,400 for maintenance, condo fees, insurance, and $2,400 for property taxes. In a minute, we're going to explore a few different scenarios, and for each one, the principal residence and the rental property and the homeowner's financial profile are going to remain exactly the same. The only thing will change is how we fund the down payment to buy the rental. Either the property is already owned and we don't need a down payment, or we use the investment line of credit as a down payment source, in which case we have to determine whether or not the rental property cash flows. These are the three scenarios we have. So let's take a look at how the cash flow cycle is again, but this time with the actual numbers from the case study. We've got your principal residence here, and you make your regular mortgage payment of $2,800 each month. The payment comes from your household bank account, same as it already does today. No change. Up above, we got the rental property. Income on the left, expenses on the right. We get just over $33,000 in rental income annually on the property. That's $2,753 each month that we can use to prepay the mortgage and drive that non-deductible debt to the ground. That equity becomes available in the investment line of credit, and we draw out that same $2,753 back into the rental checking account. And we use the funds to make all the payments on the rental property from there. That's the cycle. Every single month, we get our rental income, we run it through the primary residence mortgage, convert our bad debt over to the tax deductible side of the balance sheet, and draw the funds out to pay our rental expenses. Now, here's how the financials play out in this scenario. This is our scenario one where you already own the rental property. So the first thing we look at is how long does it actually take to move the full balance of the mortgage over to the investment line. We call that debt conversion. And depending on how many properties you have and the size of the cash flows that you have, it can take anywhere from 6 to 12 years to get where all your debt is now tax deductible. In this case, debt conversion is achieved in year 9. Now, this doesn't mean that your mortgage is paid off. It just means that you've actually reached the point where your debt is completely tax deductible and you're getting your maximum annual tax refunds. The next thing we look at is the total value of the refunds you'll get from the program. This assumes the rate of interest is constant and your marginal tax rate doesn't change either. We know in reality these things can fluctuate, but this gives us a sense of the kind of tax refunds we can expect to achieve using this strategy. In this case, the homeowner receives $117,000 in refunds over the life of the mortgage. Now, technically, you can do whatever you want with these refunds. You don't have to reinvest them into the program. But when we're doing projections like this, the assumption is that you're going to use these tax refunds to pay your mortgage down even faster because you never would have had that money anyways. Now, in the example, the net effect of using those tax refunds to accelerate the plan is we're actually able to pay off our mortgage 97 months ahead of schedule, which saves them $272,000 in future mortgage payments. Now, when you take into account we make our regular mortgage payments with after-tax dollars, you can actually calculate how much income you would need to earn to make those payments, which at 40% marginal tax rate, that would take $453,000 in income earned to make those 97 payments. Now, just to be clear, it doesn't always work out that we actually have a payment savings. In this scenario, though, the homeowner already owned that rental property. So there's no new borrowing needed to make this plan work. We're simply reorganizing cash flows that already exist, which puts the homeowner on a path to being mortgage-free sooner. But in a scenario where we need to borrow the funds for the down payment, and depending on the size of the down payment, you may need to keep that mortgage payment going longer. But we're going to see an example of what that looks like in a minute. So in order to make sure we're always comparing scenarios in a consistent manner, when there's a payment savings, we assume the homeowner would actually continue to make those monthly payments to the end of your original amortization. So we know, and since there's no mortgage to pay down, you actually get to invest those final 97 payments and earn a rate of return on them. Now, our calculator allows us to play with different assumptions on growth rates. And for this scenario, I'm using 6%. We know that the average return in the S&P 500 the last 100 years has been 10%. I like to be extra conservative with my numbers. So the future value of the investment saving actually works out to be $348,969. Now, we also calculate the future value of the rental, but you'll notice we deselected the check box where it says include rental value in net wealth. Now, the reason for that is the homeowner already owned the rental property. That's not any new wealth that we actually created through this program. We display the future value of the rental so you know what it is, and we only include in our net wealth calculations when we actually buy a rental property because of this strategy. We also would highlight if there's any balance remaining in the investment line of credit or the rental mortgage. Basically, whenever the scenario has a payment savings in the top section, that means all debt has been paid off, including the investment line. And if you see a balance on the investment line or the rental mortgage down here, you won't find a payment savings in the top section. And finally, we see a net wealth improvement of $348,000, which is basically just the future value of those 97 monthly payments. Again, we're not including the rental property value because this client already owned that rental. But $348,000 is a lot of money for only just reorganizing cash flow structures that the clients already had in place. There's no additional money that you need to be putting away. So this is scenario 2 here. This is the one where we actually purchased a rental property for $500,000 using $125,000 from the investment line as a down payment. And the property is cash flow neutral on day one. Debt conversion is a little faster this time, coming in at 8.4 years. And the reason for that is because we borrowed the down payment, which results in a higher initial tax refund, and because we use the refunds to pay down the mortgage, and the conversion process is accelerated. So over the life of the plan, we actually see a $259,000 tax refund. But we're still ahead of the original amortization. We saved about 8 payments off, totaling $22,000. Factoring for tax, that's an income savings of around $37,000. Now, growth rate assumptions are the same as the previous scenario. We keep them the same throughout all the scenarios for consistency. When we sit down to look at your numbers, we can adjust these in multiple different ways to find the numbers you're more comfortable with. We get a future value of those payment savings. Obviously, this number is just slightly higher than the actual payment savings. And the reason for that is we've only invested for 8 months, so there's just not much time for that money to grow. But in this scenario, we are including the value of that rental because we acquired this property as part of the strategy. Now that's $1.2 million in additional wealth creation for the homeowner. The investment line of credit, the rental mortgage, and the primary residence are all paid off in 30 years, which means to a net wealth improvement of $1.244 million without needing any extra cash out of your pocket. Everything was self-serviced by the rental and the investment line of credit. With scenario 3, we got the same rental, but it's actually negative cash flow. Now, you might recall the rental expenses on this property were $2,753. For this scenario, we're assuming the initial rent is $2,300, which is a $453 monthly shortfall. Now, one thing worth pointing out is when we run scenarios like this, our calculators allow us to make assumptions for cash flow appreciation. Now, rents don't really stay static forever. The value of the rent you can earn on a property improves over the time, but so do the expenses. They also get bigger as well. We don't need to get into the weeds on this, but our calculator takes all that into account. All we have to do is select the appreciation rate we want to assign for these cash flows. In all our scenarios today, we included a 1.5% cash flow appreciation rate, which means even though this property started out by losing money, it slowly improves over time. But it still will take a while to actually get it back to positive cash flow. For this scenario, the property is negative cash flow for around 15 years. Now, the reason I'm pointing this out is because I really want to drive the point home that you can actually use this strategy to purchase a negative cash flow rental, and it can still make sense for the right investor. The structure covers the shortfall through the investment line of credit, so you can own a property like this without having to fund the shortfall from your personal cash. I'm going to go through these numbers a tiny bit faster. So we got debt conversion at 9.17 years. We get a total tax refund of $546,000. Our growth assumptions, we just talked about that. They stay the same. Now our future rental value, that's same as the previous one. There's no change. Now this is where we see a difference. The investment line actually has a balance remaining of $343,000. Now that's because we ran a negative cash flow for 15 years. And we actually had to draw on the investment line to cover the shortfall all along the way. So we actually didn't have to pull that money out of your own pocket. This is one of those examples where there is no payment savings. But when we look at the net wealth improvement, remember, we're comparing the timeline against the original amortization on the primary residence. In this case, the original amortization was 30 years. So this is the net wealth improvement at year 30. They have a rental property worth $1.2 million, and we can subtract the balance remaining on that investment line, which would actually give us an $877,000 net wealth improvement. And this property was negative cash flow for 15 years, but you didn't need to spend any extra money out of yourself. So those three scenarios are obviously looking at holding your rental or rentals for 30 years, depending on your time horizon. But what if you just want to use your rental or purchase a rental to be mortgage-free as soon as possible? In this option, we're going to be looking at selling our rental properties sooner than 30 years. I personally wouldn't be doing this, but for some, being mortgage-free as soon as possible is ideal to them. So we need to showcase the power of this strategy for them as well. So in scenario 1 is the rental property you already own, and with factoring capital gains on the taxes from selling the rental property at a 40% marginal tax rate, you could actually be mortgage-free in 12 years on your principal residence. That means now all you owe is your property taxes, your maintenance costs, and any other servicing costs on that property, but there's no more mortgage on the home, on the rental. And now this was down from a 30-year amortization, less than half the time. In scenario 2, we are borrowing that $125,000 to purchase that first rental property. In this case, we borrowed from our down payment, didn't increase our monthly costs, and we can still be mortgage-free in 16 years. Again, factoring capital gains with selling that rental property. Is your mind actually blown yet? So this is pretty amazing in my opinion, because we bought a rental property with borrowed money from the down payment of our equity. The property was cash flow negative for 15 years. We didn't spend a single dollar beyond our regular mortgage payment at any point in the plan. And we created $877,000 in new wealth for ourselves without sacrificing our lifestyle to get it. Now we have options. We could sell that rental, pay off the investment line, and pocket the $877,000. But I'm not sure I would recommend that. It just depends on your scenario. But a better plan might be looking at restructuring to see how much equity we actually could pull from that property where the rental now services all the mortgages and everything else, because when you pull equity from a property, you don't get taxed on it. Now we're truly starting to behave like the wealthy, because debt isn't taxed and we get to keep 100% of the money we draw from the rental, while we let that tenant pay off the debt over the next period of time. Now, this is a pretty compelling argument to buy a rental property, even in today's market. You want to use the tools that you can to help yourself get ahead financially. But the reality is, for a lot of people, even after watching this presentation, after learning how this works, they're still going to have their doubts. Market conditions aren't there, interest rates are high, negative cash flow. There are all kinds of things that come up for people, and that's all right. It can take some time to get our heads around new concepts like this. I'm here to help guide and explain all this. Keep in mind, as Warren Buffett once famously said, when people are fearful, be greedy. Now the time is, because many people are fearful right now. Over the next 6, 12, 18 months, somewhere in the near future, there's a good deal to be found. Get in contact, look about seeing how we can reorganize your cash flows. Maybe you're looking at buying that rental property, so you want to reach out to your realtor. We can start looking at properties that are going to be cash flow positive, cash flow neutral for you. Be greedy. Don't wait for the markets to come roaring back and then buy. Take advantage of market conditions and negotiate a great deal on a place where you can. Use the tools that you learned about today's structure, your mortgage, so you can offset any potential cash flows or shortfalls over the near term and maximize your financial benefits over the long run. What I really love about this strategy is you're able to do it without any extra cost. You don't even have to do it with me. You can bring it to someone else. I just like sharing strategies that I can help people get ahead financially. Now, with that, I'd like to say thank you for watching all the way to the end. I hope you found this information useful and that it was actually worth your time. As I promised, I got a couple special offers for you. Nothing crazy, but we'll go from here. So if you're curious to see how this strategy could work for you, look at actually booking a consultation with me. I think I pinned my calendar, but I'll also put it in the comments here, the chat again, just so everyone has it. But from there, we'll actually get some information, and then I'll build a financial benefits report for you. And then I can send you a financial analysis with your numbers in it. The report will show you how much sooner your mortgage will be paid off, the kind of tax refunds you can expect from the strategy, and how much wealthier you would actually be over the life of your mortgage. Now, obviously, my other special offer was for you. Request any information, give me a call, book an email, then I can actually send you that Master Your Mortgage for Financial Freedom. It's free. I'll pay for the shipping. You just got to tell me where to send it. And if you don't want any of that, if you don't want the report, you don't want the book, but you just want to chat with me, please give me a call. We can chat about all different options with the Smith maneuver specifically, or even just if you're looking at new mortgages. Thanks again for spending the time here with me today. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and we'll be doing the Q&A here pretty soon. So yeah, we'll get into the Q&A here. I'll get my camera back up. I see a couple questions here. So Dave, it looks like you, so what would be the specifics, be the savings specific to interest only? If you could clarify that to me a little bit more. I don't know if you mean if you're on a mortgage that's only paying interest, but Lewis, so could this work if you have a rental property but don't own a primary? So hey, Lewis, it actually won't, it doesn't actually work because you're already getting those tax benefits. If you owning rental properties, keep buying the rental properties. If you have a cheap rent, you're already getting yourself ahead financially that way. This is just for people to get ahead better financially if they have a primary residence that's that bad debt and they want to convert it into good debt. And then, yeah, if we have any other questions, please shoot them over, and yeah, I'll be able to answer, or we'll just be able to hop off and hope everyone else can enjoy the rest of their night. In this case, do you need to sell your primary residence to transfer to a business? So Dave, if you were actually to sell it and put it into a business, especially if it was incorporated, you wouldn't actually be able to do this strategy because you're already getting all those tax benefits if it was in a corporation. The best thing would be is and you don't have to leave this on one single property. Say if you have a primary residence right now and in 5 years you want to move, this doesn't lock you to that property. All this stuff, we can actually bring it with you to all the different properties along your life. You're not just locked in at this one property. We can change it on the rentals. We can change on your primary residence. Don't just think you're locked in on this one home now and you're never moving away. Thanks for coming there, Colton, man. Appreciate it.